Hey, Ashley, thanks for inviting me to present to this group here. I've worked with quite a few AmeriCorps people over the years, um, mostly through Knox Ed, but also at the Ijams and some other places as well. So thanks for having me. There could have been any number of people that could do the same thing here, talk about what being a naturalist is like. I guess I do have a little bit of a presentation. If I can share my screen, I'll go ahead and do that. There you go.
Do you have that ability, Mac? Are you?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, great. Wonderful.
Okay.
We can see it.
Okay. I'm going to basically talk about this idea that being a naturalist is sort of a learned activity, but is something that's valuable for many different occupations, as well as a life skill that is useful for many different things. Just to give you a little background about who I am. I'm a retired scientist from Oak Ridge National Laboratory. I just heard Josh talk about him working at Oak Ridge National Laboratory now, but I worked there for over 40 years, started as a graduate student. I had a background in mathematics, botany, ecology, as a college majors that served me well through that career. I spent most of my time not doing field work or being a naturalist, but taking information and data, gathering information and data, putting it in databases and developing computer simulation models. I actually did a lot of programming, worked on the supercomputers out there, but working on models of how terrestrial ecosystems gather, store, and release carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere. So it was integral in understanding what the fate of burning fossil fuels was on controlling the atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide and thereby impacting climate change. But one thing you find out is that you run out of data fast, and you still have many scientific questions to answer. So I got involved in doing field work and actually inventing some field programs to try and collect the information that was needed to put parameters into these models. So I spent 40 years doing this. I was actually started working on climate change in the early 1980s. So even before it became sort of a big issue in the public's view. Currently, I retired almost 10 years ago, and through this experience with learning how ecosystems process water, energy, nutrients through different life forms and soils and geology, I realized that this was important. These ecosystems provide ecosystem services that are important for us: clean air, clean water, biodiversity, carbon storage. And by and large, most people you run into only have a vague understanding of this. So I decided I needed to take what I'd learned and share it with other people. I currently volunteer as an educator and instructor with Ijams, the Great Smoky Mountain Institute at Tremont, the Sierra Club ICO. ICO stands for Inspiring Connections Outdoors. It's a program of the Sierra Club where we partner, volunteers from the Sierra Club partner with agencies that serve, that work with youth in underserved communities to provide educational and fun outings for them throughout the community. We work with Big Brothers and Big Sisters, with Girls Inc., with Boys and Girls Clubs, with Knox Ed schools for these things. I also lead field trips for Trees Knoxville, Smoky Mountain Field School, and some other places as well. So that's basically my background. So what is a naturalist? Well, a naturalist is someone who studies patterns in nature. And these patterns are revealed to us, things about how they're connect relationships between plants, animals, and various ecosystem processes. And so we can better understand how these operate in the world and how they change with changes in environmental conditions. And basically, what I said at the beginning was there are certain skills that you have to develop to become a good naturalist. Anybody can sort of do plant identification, wildlife tracking, bird language, but by understanding these in detail, getting to improve your observation skills, gathering clues, making predictions, testing your assumptions. You learn firsthand by experience with these organisms in their environment, how they're related and what it means. It teaches long-term thinking and patience, because some of these things are hard to figure out. You can look at things and wonder, and it takes a long time of looking at other things, wondering and looking for connections and studying and looking up what other people have learned about that to finally get an understanding. And this is different than going out and looking through a guidebook and saying, oh yeah, this is a red maple, and then going on and saying, but what is it about it that makes it a red maple? What is it doing? Why is it here? Those kinds of things. So it's patience and study rather than just instant gratification from clicking a photo and sending it to LeafSnap and trying to figure out what it is. Although that's still a useful tool, or useful tools, as I'll point out. So these are skills that not only useful for understanding nature, but they're useful for almost any job you have. Penetrating deeply, understanding the connections and relationships, really making observations and understanding how those observations lead to investigation, making hypotheses, and understanding. So why is it important to teach and learn these naturalist skills, especially for young people? These are life skills that are learned directly from experience with the outdoors, and they lead to critical thinking, better memory, more. Not only is it just analytical, but also emotional connection with the things that you're working with. Being outdoors increases skills in moving around in the environment, balance and physical movement, and also, as we've learned through this pandemic, that happiness and stress management are often alleviated by going outdoors and breathing fresh air and looking at nature in a new way. Now, when Ashley first invited me, I was going to be at Ijams, and we were going to have a breakout room next to in the glass room, which has a door that goes outside. And I was hoping to be able to take everybody outside and go through an active learning experience that is important for developing observational skills. And This I'm going to call I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. These are 3 steps that if you practice will increase your observational skills. So making observations, start with the phrase, I notice. And so it's something that you notice with your senses, your sight, your touch, your smell, all your senses, hearing, taste. Be careful you don't taste anything without knowing exactly what it is, but make sure that you're using all your senses when you're out there making an observation. And you know it's an observation when you start with, I notice, and then describe what you're looking at with your senses. And I would have everybody stand around and find some object. Maybe you can do that now. Look out your window and find something. If you have a window handy, I've got my red striped cat here, and I'll use that as an observation. I noticed that he has very long whiskers on his face. So that's a notice. You can do with your eyes, you can feel them, you can see them move, things like that. If you look out your window, you can probably see, what's one thing that's amazing, if you go outside almost anywhere and look up, you'll see a bird. That's something you notice, and you notice again and again and again. That's an observation that leads to a pattern that begs a question. Why, when I go outside and look up, do I often see a bird? So observations are something you notice while looking at something directly. It's not saying what it is. For example, I see a leaf. This is an identification. It's not an observation. Saying it looks awesome or smells bad. This is a value judgment. It's an opinion, not an observation. Something where you're trying to make a deduction directly from the object you're looking at is not an observation. That's a possible explanation for that observation, but it's not an observation. So make sure you look at that thing very carefully. So if anybody has an observation that they'd like to share, that they've looked out their window and seen, go ahead and put it in the chat box and try and do this. So normally we'd be standing outside at Ijams on a patch of natural ecosystem trying to do something, make an observation here.
Can I make an observation?
Sure.
Yeah, I was not looking out the window, but I'm looking at my fish tank and this piece of wood I have in there. And I noticed that it has both curves and kind of straight lines and angles.
Okay, see, I'm going to scroll down at the bottom here. That's good. I have, Ashley put in, I noticed the moss out my window is greener than the grass is. So that's an observation. That's great.
I keep putting the dog on the patio because I feel bad that I've been on Zoom forever and I can't pay attention to him. So we have a south-facing apartment, and I noticed that, he's getting fresh air and some good south-facing sunshine.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the next part of this exercise would be, I wonder, and this is where you start asking questions about the observations. And formulating hypotheses. And one of the keys of formulating hypotheses is getting additional information from people around you. I mean, if we were sitting outside, we'd all ask people what kind of observation, that we look for similar observations, for patterns among those observations, and using those to develop a hypothesis. For example, with Ashley's question, we have the moss looks greener than the grass. The question is, can we come up with an idea of why that would be? You know, it doesn't have to be sophisticated. It could be that one is the moss in a wetter place than the grass, or is it in a sunnier place than the grass? Does it have the same pattern? Is the pattern the same in the summer as it is in the winter, like now? Or is the pattern changed through time? Yeah, that's right. Is the moss always green throughout the year? So these are formulating hypotheses. And it's the beginning of asking interesting questions about why the pattern occurs, and leads to making more observations to try and examine that hypothesis further. Now, this is exactly what a scientist does, but sometimes they use more sophisticated tools or techniques, or ask bigger questions or whatever, but these are the same skills that you can learn through being a naturalist that apply to scientific questions, or even questions of trying to deal with other issues as well, non-scientific questions as well. You can then sort these questions into whether they're testable. Can we answer these through further observations, or setting up experiments and testing those? Your hypothesis should have a way of being disproven. I mean, there are 1,000 ways to prove a hypothesis, but usually, and many ways to disprove it. But if you disprove it, you know that the original hypothesis is wrong. If you just provide more evidence for the hypothesis, you don't know whether it's still true or false, because you're just finding another pattern that fits the same thing. You can also sort the questions: is it researchable? Can you look it up and find an answer for it? And then those aren't quite, I mean, those are fun exercises to do when you get home, but it's also fun to try and figure out things by collecting more information and understanding it. And this is the way you answer questions that no one knows the answer to, and leads you onto a pathway of discovery. And then there are questions that aren't knowable, not testable. You can come up with an idea that that a color is something that isn't innate in the thing you're looking at, but in how you experience it. And these are things that could be explored in other ways, through philosophy, through cognitive things as well, but don't tell you exactly anything more about the pattern that the observation of the pattern that you're looking at. And then the third part of this, it reminds me of relating your observations to something that you've seen before, or reminds you of some other things, makes a connection that helps preserve it in your memory, and increases your ability to recall that information or those observations if you see that later on. So, simple things like the veins on this leaf remind me of the lines in the palm of my hand. You see another leaf with lines that look like the ones in the palm of your hand, you'll remember that they're related. These observations are related, and that these hypotheses can be further explored by making these relationships between these things. Or I can remind you of something that you've learned before, like something about edible plants. Do edible plants have some common thread, or is it just something that helps you recall the observation that you made once you see that these other connections? So those 3 steps are important. I notice, making sure you really notice. When I go out with people, even adults, but especially children, if you see something on the side of the trail, they'll almost say, well, what's that plant? And if you tell them what that plant is, oh, that's a box elder tree, they'll go click and then won't look at it in any more detail. And it's the same thing with adults. They think they've seen it and filed it away, but they haven't really looked at it. They haven't really noticed. And so the key thing is, even if you look it up in a guidebook and you say, click, that's a box elder, that's a red maple, make sure you really observe it. Make sure you really look at it. And one of the important tools here is spend some time with a journal, a notebook where you can sketch something, write down your observation, go through these things. I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. Record those in a journal. When you go back over these things, you remember on this day, when I was walking on this trail, I saw this gray bird that was eating on the ground or whatever, and have a record of that. So I'll get back to the importance of journaling and other tools that you can use to increase your naturalist skills. But I wanted to go through, where do you find naturalists? If you think naturalists are sort of weirdos that wander around and write in their journals and live alone, yeah, there's some of those, but there are naturalists that range from being scientists to being educators to being land managers, whatever. And so I put together a little list here. I mean, just in schools, there's an organization called the North American Association for Environmental Education. In Tennessee, the chapter is called the Tennessee Environmental Education Association. And these are teachers that are interested in teaching natural history as a way to get people to learn about scientific process, the scientific method, and how to understand how the world works through scientific investigation using outdoor environmental education tools. So if you become a teacher, this is something to look for ways to get kids outside, learn firsthand, use those tools to learn how the scientific method works. In universities, these are often professional botanists, zoologists, ecologists, wildlife biologists, fisheries biologists, and sometimes you'll find naturalists in forestry and agriculture, but those people usually are more extractive resource people, but nonetheless, there are some good naturalists that are in forestry and agriculture as well. Now, being a naturalist is just one of the skills for these people. They're basically scientists that use these naturalist tools to begin to understand the larger scientific questions that they're trying to answer, collecting data, making hypotheses, collecting additional information to examine those hypotheses in detail. Environmental nonprofits are also a good place. Nature Conservancy, National Parks Conservation Association, National Geographic are large organizations that have lots of naturalists that do field work. They're always all the time doing collecting information on where endangered species live and what's happening to them and why, things like that. There are also local activist groups like Georgia Forest Watch, Heartwood, and Wild South that are in this area looking for areas that need protection, making sure that best management practices are applied to public lands and private lands to ensure biodiversity, ecosystem services, and things like this. There are environmental education centers, organizations like nature centers. Ijams is a good example in Knoxville. They have youth programs and adult programs, and all the time trying to educate people about the natural world that Ijams is responsible for, and in the community as well. Zoos and aquariums are a good place also to find naturalists, usually in their educational programs, not just in their curation activities, but they also have educational outreach programs. The Knoxville Zoo has an educational coordinator who does monarch butterfly tagging and butterfly monitoring and frog watch and a whole bunch of other activities that they engage volunteers in to collect information for scientific study. Bird clubs are also a place where you find really avid naturalists who really love birds. There are organizations that are specifically environmental education nonprofits that have job opportunities as well. In this area, Tremont and Wesley Woods are good examples, but there are many across the state and across the country as well. And sort of interesting ecotourism companies. These are places that their main mission is to get people outdoors and learn something about the environment so that they love it and want to protect it. And good examples in this area, Walk in the Woods operates around the Smokies. They lead high adventure ecotourism things where you go backpacking and hiking and all the time learn about basically what the Cherokees knew about the forest at the time when they sort of lived there, but also what we've learned about it since then. There are other ones, just get outdoors. Alarka Expeditions is just over in the Little Tennessee River Valley in North Carolina, and others that lead excursions for people who want to sign up and learn more. Private and public land managers, nature reserves, arboretums, gardens. You can think of arboretums or gardens as the equivalent to zoos for plants. A lot of endangered species, curation and expeditions to learn more about them are carried out by these kinds of organizations. Wildlife refuges, tribal reservations are also a place where naturalists play an important role in preserving the environment that's of those places. And then local, state, and federal agencies. We have naturalists that work at the level of city, county, state, national parks, state departments of environment and conservation are often in charge of the state's responsibility for meeting the obligations of the Endangered Species Act. And so they hire lots of, well, not lots, but some naturalists to make sure that places are surveyed and inventoried. TVA, for example, has miles and miles of power line right of way, which they have to update the environmental impact statements for every year. And these environmental impact statements require consideration of endangered species. And so experts are engaged with them, sometimes on a contract basis, but sometimes as staff members as well. And then EPA, Fish and Wildlife Service, National Forest Service, their responsibility is to make sure that federal, state, local, federal, and state lands are managed in a way that preserves their biodiversity, and naturalists play an important part of that. So I want to say, let's see, I just have a couple minutes left, but being a naturalist means you're developing values that create empathy and caring about nature. And this is really important in a world today where more and more land gets converted to agriculture and suburbs and development. We need to learn more about how to better manage these things. And so if we understand how these relationships work, we can do it effectively. So the more people that become naturalists, the better off we'll be. We need to promote these natural skills to restore landscape scale ecological processes that provide essential ecosystem services for the communities we live in: clean water, air, nutrient retention, biodiversity, or just some of the services that these intact watersheds provide for us. If we had to go out and engineer these, once these ecosystems were gone, it would be a tremendous expense. So how can you increase your natural skills? Well, practice, I observe, I wonder, reminds me of whenever you're outside, intentionally go outside and do this. Keep a journal. Best to have a notebook with your own drawings, but photos are also useful. I know some people that are good naturalists and they use Facebook essentially as their journal to share observations they made, things that they learned, hypotheses that they have, get feedback on that from other people. So whatever works out. The other thing is you can join the community science project, ones that actually collect data that scientists actually use for analysis and better understanding of the environment, or things like eBird, the National Phenology Network, iNaturalist, and the North American Butterfly Association all have phone apps that you can use to make observations, learn something about it, and then upload data that is actually used. Your observations then become an important source, a resource for scientists to use. You can take classes. The best ones around here are the Tennessee Naturalist Program, which is one that's offered by the state to help get volunteers for the state parks. But Ijams is one of the centers for this. It's a 12-week long course. It's fun. You get outside, learn a lot with experienced people. There's a naturalist certification program that Tremont offers, which is a little more in depth than the Tennessee Naturalist Program, but also trains you to become an interpreter of what you've learned. And then there's other programs, Master Gardeners, that are through the UT Extension, native plant certification through the Tennessee Valley Wild Ones, and other things. The other thing you can do is go on guided nature walks or explorations and use that to learn more and see these naturalists in operation where they're encouraging you to use your skills to make observations and draw your own hypotheses and conclusions about what you observe. So I think that's basically what I have. I'd probably have just a few minutes for questions or comments or experiences that people want to share.
Thank you, Max, so much. That was wonderful. Do you have a moment to hang out for questions?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, group, our next presentation will take place at 3:30. So you're welcome to go on a break, or you can hang out with me and talk with Mac about all of the wonders